The movie begins in a laboratory that is a marvel of modern technology, with sleek, futuristic equipment as the woman lays still in a glass chamber, bathed in the eerie glow of the X-ray machine as it scanned her. After the scan is over, Deanna exits the chamber and approaches her doctor, Charles, who smiles up at her. Hoping to lighten the mood, Charles tells her that he forgot to shave that morning, to which Deanna, playful, answers that she is sorry to hear that. Getting up from his seat, he takes her over to the large screen that shows Deanna's full body scan. Sighing deeply, he tells her that it was hard for him to explain what they were seeing. Understanding his stress, Deanna takes charge and announces what she saw, telling him that the cancer in her body had metastasized, making treatment prospects very poor. When Charles expresses his regrets for her condition, she carelessly tells him that it wasn't his fault. Turning around to address him, she estimates that she was only left with 2 or 3 months to live, which Charles agrees to, but Deanna knows he is lying. Going to her office, the battered-looking Deanna sits on her desk, feeling miserable about her condition and about dying so early. Opening the cabinet under her desk, she takes out a gun and thinks about ending it right then and there. As Deanna gazes at the gun, a sudden knock at the door startles her, prompting her to swiftly conceal the weapon in her cabinet before inviting the visitor inside. The door swings open to reveal a visibly anxious man who confesses his uncertainty about being in the correct location. Assuring him that he is indeed in the right place, Deanna hospitably offers him some water, only to be politely declined. While the man known as Robert takes a sit, Deanna introduces herself and tells him that she wants to ask him a few questions. Although confused, the playful man agrees and watches as Deanna places a paperweight on the desk beside him and covers it with a handkerchief. She then smiles down at him and asks him what is under the handkerchief. Deciding to play along and indulge the women, Robert answers that it was a paperweight. Appreciating his cooperation, she goes to her desk and clicks a button, making Robert nervous. Sprinting up from his seat, he asks Deanna if she is recording their conversation. Seeming careless about the situation, Deanna asks if that would be a problem, but Robert demands to know. He then looks around the large, well-decorated office and realizes that it is full of cameras. When he tries to confront Deanna, she tells him that they are both being observed. Observing the exchange from a separate room, 3 individuals monitored the unfolding conversation on multiple screens. After composing himself, Robert took a seat on the sofa opposite Deanna and returned her smile. Sensing his newfound composure, she asked if he was enjoying the surroundings. Seeming confused, he explains to her that he hadn't been there long enough to form an opinion about it. Deanna asks him how long he has been there, but Robert has a hard time answering. Seeing the frown on his face, Deanna continues to ask what he did before he arrived there. Robert confidently responds that he was at work, where he was the head of a very important technological company. Deanna continues to ask the man a few questions about his job, then shifts to his family. Getting uneasy by the second, Robert discloses that he has been married for 13 years and had 2 children. Suddenly feeling as though he's being interrogated, Robert rises from his chair and addresses Deanna with an accusatory tone. In response, Deanna abruptly questions Robert about the contents concealed beneath the handkerchief, but he struggles to recall. Then when she inquires about the age of the gray-haired man, he confidently answers that he is only 40, prompting Deanna to urge him to take a look at himself in the mirror. When he looks in the mirror, Robert is shocked to see that he is aged several decades and begins to scream at Deanna, asking her what they had done to him. After finishing her session, Deanna goes to meet with her colleague and they discuss her patient. Her colleague tells her that she could be helping so many other patients instead of spending all her time with Robert, but Deanna is adamant about seeing her session through and asks for 1 more week. Sitting back on her chair, she reminisced about the time she spent with her husband and 2 kids as they ran around in the house they just moved in. After lunch, Deanna meets with Robert once again, who doesn't remember ever meeting her or being in her office, even though they have had that session several times. Robert begins to ask the same questions he usually does, telling her that he thinks he must be in the wrong office when Deanna informs him that she's a psychiatrist. When Deanna asks him what he thought their conversation was about, Robert angrily suspects an old colleague he suspected of trying to usurp his position. When prompted to provide more details, details, Robert begins to explain that Jerry had been his right-hand man in the company until he made a grave error in judgment. Jerry attempted to orchestrate a coup to remove Robert from his position, leading to Robert's decision to dismiss him. However, Robert harbors doubts that this cunning individual was stopped by his termination. Looking at her with determination, he tells her that no one is going to take his company from him, as he has several plans for it. Taking a sit across from her, Robert begins to lecture her about his beliefs, telling her that inconsistency invited disrespect, which she notes was very important to him. Nodding with agreement, he lists down all of the things he believes in, and Deanna nods, following his every word. Picking up his words, Deanna notes that he was an ambitious man, but Robert explains that he only wanted what he was owed. Angry at the man, Deanna yells at him, asking him to drop the charades. Robert is confused at her sudden outburst and accuses her of speaking to him as if they had met before. Getting up from his seat, he tells her that they need to conclude this meeting as he has to be at his daughter's school soon, adding that she would understand if she had any kids. Angry at the retort, Deanna tells Robert that she had 2 children, but he had murdered them. After the session, Deanna goes to speak to her supervisor, convinced that Robert is just hiding inside himself and sure that she can help him regain his memory. Her supervisor is sure that Robert has lost his mind and that there is nothing they can do, but Deanna is adamant about making the man accountable for his actions. Starting another session with Robert, Deanna tells him that her colleagues think they have narrowed down his condition, which he finds strange as he didn't know he had one. Mentioning the condition's name, she explains that it was a rare form of memory loss and tells him a story of a Marine sergeant who was in good health and lost all memories after a certain date. The man could only remember 40 minutes of anything that happened in the present, which Deanna tries to relate to Robert. Annoyed by Deanna, Robert smugly asks her for the questioner, assuming that was why he was asked there. He is still convinced that his colleagues are trying to get him to abdicate his position. As he walks toward the door, Deanna asks him about the weather he remembered that morning. Looking back at her and with complete assurance, he explains that it was a warm spring morning. Telling him to look out the window before he leaves, Deanna opens the shade covering them and reveals a frigid, deserted landscape. When she sees the shock on his face, she tells him that there was a 24-year gap in his memory. To calm his head, Robert sits on the sofa, positioning herself in front of him. Deanna begins to mention events that they had spoken about previously, but Robert had no recollection. She then makes him recount what he remembered about his day, and makes him understand that he is unable to remember how he arrived at her office because he was supposed to go to work. Once he admits that he can't remember, Deanna asks him about the project his company was working on for the government. Robert explains to Deanna that they had managed a breakthrough, which was an impulse beam weaponry that was highly targeted. Sitting on the couch, Deanna remembers the day she was having breakfast with her family, and a military sergeant had come to her house, informing her of a serious situation. Telling her that her presence was requested to come to the banker, the officer informs her that she has no choice and that she cannot bring her family before getting her into the car. As the car drove away, Deanna looked at her family with sadness in her eyes. Standing in front of Robert, she concludes the story about how the catastrophe started, informing him that she worked for the NSA. Confused by what he was hearing, Robert begs Deanna, telling her that he only wanted to go home. Angry, Deanna reminds him that he doesn't have a home and that none of them do, including their families. She tells him that they were stuck in a bunker 1,000 meters under a hill in Virginia. Angry at Deanna, Robert begins to scream that he doesn't believe what she is saying, telling her that it isn't winter. Tears welling up in her eyes, Deanna tells him that they are experiencing a nuclear winter. When he remains rigid, Deanna pulls out a gun and points it at him, locking them inside so no one would be able to interrupt them. Robert tries to yell for help, but Deanna threatens that he would remember or die trying. She then begins to show him images of large cities that were destroyed by the nuclear bombs, and tells him that the only known survivors were the 871 people living in the bunker. Deanna informs Robert that his experts had warned him about what the beam could do, telling him that he was informed it could trigger any nuclear missiles within a 60-mile radius, but Robert had refused to listen. Robert explains that he had heard the warning and that they had built safeguards for their weapon, but that they never veered from the course to present it in time because they had other competitions. Robert then accuses her of being backward thinking and unable to accept changes in technology. Angry at his arrogance, Deanna points her gun at him and tells him that she should put a bullet in his head. Robert begins to threaten Deanna's career, telling her that he knows important people in the White House. Looking at him sarcastically, Deanna explains that he is the most important person in the White House and informs him that he is still the President of the United States. She informs him that she was his psychiatrist during his rule and that he had shared many intimate details with her. Deanna tells him that he had ordered a preemptive strike that triggered nuclear weapons in the Gulf, and 6 other countries had felt threatened, returning the attack and causing all hell to break loose. Deanna shows him the burnt body of his wife, who had remained with the children at the White House, thinking they would be safe. Deanna makes the image in the room available for everyone in the bunker to see as the next events unfold. The image causes Robert to be flooded with all of his memories and causes him to break down crying. He tells her that he believed in what he was doing at the time, unaware of what it could lead to. His only objective was to protect the country, and he didn't want to be emotional about his decision, but he had never assumed it could lead to total distraction. Looking at the man breaking down on the floor, she tells him that 871 of them had survived and would repopulate the Earth once more. She then announces that there is a reason for her cruelty, telling him that people in the future need to remember their responsibilities. Deanna then points the gun at herself and pulls the trigger. After the episode, we see Deanna's colleague sitting on her chair, and she greets Robert as he walks through the door, asking the same question he always does.